I'll say hello, everyone. My name is Matt Haubrich. I'm the chair of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. I want to welcome you all to webinar 64 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO. Today's topic will feature highlights from the recent TRB TAM Conference. We have presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. For more information on this webinar series, visit tam-portal.com. That's TAM-portal.com. From there, click Events in the main menu to register for any webinar. You will also find archives of previous webinars, and links to videos and slides from today's webinar will also be posted on the site. This is the home of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. For information on the subcommittee, visit the TAM portal, tam-portal.com, and click on Subcommittee on Asset Management under the Community menu. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's chat feature. We will answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. In terms of audio logistics, we'll invite the audience members to unmute and share their views during the group discussion session at the end of the webinar. Until then, we hope you'll be careful to keep your audio connection muted. If you haven't already, please be sure to mute your audio so that our presenters are not interrupted. Thank you. That covers the logistics of today's webinar. So now I'll turn it over to Tashia Clemmons of FHWA. Hi, Tasha.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone joining us today. I'm Tashia Clemmons, and I represent the Transportation Asset Performance Team in the Office of Infrastructure and Federal Highway Administration. Federal Highways, in cooperation with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management, is very pleased to sponsor this webinar series. We feel that it is a great way to bring people together around a series of important topics and to connect with the asset management community. We have a great team of speakers on the agenda today who will share highlights from the 14th National Conference on Transportation Asset Management convened by the Transportation Research Board on July the 8th through the 11th. It was a great way to be able to meet with the TAM community in person in Boston. And with this webinar, we have reached the 64th webinar in our series. FHWA and AASHTO held a peer exchange during the conference where we focused on the art of project prioritization as our topic. The TRB TAM Conference that followed was filled with a rich set of advancements and progress on TAM from transportation agencies and their consultants. We heard about infrastructure and risk resilience innovations, as well as organization and people innovations. FHWA was extremely pleased with the turnout of attendees for the peer exchange, as well as the TAM conference. It was a great opportunity to reconnect in person and to refresh our goals and to look forward to the next conference. FHWA's Transportation Asset Performance Team is committed to increasing knowledge and capabilities at transportation agencies across the U.S. I encourage you to visit us online for more information and to gain access to available resources. The address is shown on the screen. And finally, I just want to say thank you for your participation today. You will enjoy today's presentations. Now I would like to turn it over to Hyana Park of Spy Pond Partners to give an overview of today's webinar, to review today's agenda, and to introduce our speakers. Hyana?
All right, thank you, Tasha. Now, as Matt Haubrich mentioned previously, the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. For this webinar, we're going to hear about the highlights from the 14th National Conference on Transportation Asset Management. And then we'll follow that with discussing implementing ideas from the conference. For the agenda today, we started off by hearing from Matt Haubrich and Tashia Clemmons. Then we're going to move on to the featured presentations. I'll introduce each speaker at the start of their presentation. And in brief, it will be Laura Zale, who's the Senior Director of Capital Program Support at SEPTA, the transit agency in Philadelphia. She was the TAM Conference Planning Chair. We'll then hear from Mike Johnson, who's the Caltrans TAM Manager, who will share his takeaways from the TAM Peer Exchange. Then William Johnson from Colorado DOT, their Performance and Asset Management Manager, will discuss infrastructure and risk resilience innovations from the conference. And then we'll end on the presentation from Matt Hardy from Spy Pond, who will discuss organizations and people in innovations. Then we'll have an open group discussion at the end. So start putting your thoughts together. And if you have any specific questions of the presenters, use the Zoom chat feature at any time during the webinar, and we'll kind of take them in the order you submit them. We'll make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. Our first presentation today is from Laura Zale, the conference chair and the TAM lead at SEPTA. Now I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you. So it's hard to believe that after, I don't know, 18 months of planning this particular conference, a lot of work went into it. Now we're about a month afterwards. So I'm going to give you some highlights or some key takeaways that I took from the overall planning of the conference. And my co-presenters are going to talk about specifics to the presentations that were given during the conference. So just to give you some highlights of the conference itself, this was, as has been said, the 14th National Conference on Transportation Asset Management. It was hosted in Boston, Massachusetts, and it had about 325 attendees. We really had a broad range of attendees this year from DOTs, transit agencies, local agencies, a good mix of practitioners, and also some students as well. This was, on paper, it was one event. However, there were several components that really helped to bring all of this content forward. We've had the AASHTO Peer Exchange, which included a scavenger hunt. We had the FTA TAM Roundtable. We had the pre-conference workshops. We had the traditional podium sessions, poster session, and smaller workshops. We started planning and started delivering content for this conference about 6 weeks in advance through a hackathon for the AASHTO TAM Guide, as well as a TAM competition that was open to young professionals. When we were putting the conference together, the planning committee thought, if we're going to have people, if we're going to come back to live conferences, in person as opposed to on Zoom, what did we want to accomplish? And we had 4 goals. Those were to give attendees tools and techniques to advance their asset management practice at home. We wanted to demonstrate and focus on tactical successes, not just an overview of projects, but what physical things did you accomplish during your implementations, and what did you learn from those? We wanted to think holistically and identify ways to advance the asset management field in general. And at the end of the day, we heard loud and clear from many folks at TRB, AASHTO, FHWA, and FTA that we wanted this to be an interactive event. It's really ironic to say this from a Zoom platform, but people really wanted a chance to engage and speak in person. So how do we do that? Like most TRB conferences, we were organized. We found ourselves looking at 4 traditional tracks. Those were organization for asset management, actionable asset management plans, assessing risk, and incorporating sustainability. We also saved time on our agenda for emerging topics. It had the nickname for me Wildcard, which is unfortunately made it into the program. But we really wanted to make sure that as we were planning and looking ahead, that we saved some space on the agenda to incorporate things that emerged from other sectors. To that event, we had a lot of guest speakers from other industries. We had folks from FHWA talking about geotechnical asset management. We had presenters from Massport. We had folks talking about Southwest Airlines. We also tried very hard to balance the presentations with opportunities to be interactive. And many of our session moderators developed activities that as a counter to the traditional lecture sessions to really allow people to think and to discuss the material that had been presented. So here are my thoughts about how to plan for future asset management events, whether they be large-scale conferences or even just marketing or discussions within your own agency. The biggest takeaway and the thing that I thought about a lot when we were putting this conference together is that it really takes time to show progress. This is a statue that was across the street from the hotel that the conference itself was in. One of the takeaways that I took from waiting 5 years between in-person conferences is that it really showed the industry an opportunity to really make advances in things that we talk about at the previous conference. A lot of these advances came in the forms of technology, in the way that people are using software, or the way that people are thinking about asset management data in and of itself. I think one of the things that I took from this conference as we started to plan was that it's time to advance the conversation outside of the traditional asset management silo. And what I mean by that is that in today's society, there's a lot of input, a lot of interest in receiving information and using it for many, many purposes. And in our industry, we tend to talk about breaking down silos in organizations, but also the counter to that is that we tend to build silos around the asset management folks ourselves. In order to accomplish this, thinking about asset management outside of the silo, we actually worked with several different TRB committees on communication, about performance management, and even within the Younger Members Forum to bring different folks to the table. We actually, for our closing session, had a professor from University of Texas who actually spoke about change management, which I think was a first for the conference. I touched on this before, but when you plan events, when you start to engage at your agency, it's very, very important to encourage participation from all levels of the practice. And that's really hard sometimes when you're trying to justify the needs for funding. But I think it's very, very important to showcase, especially to your young staff members, how the information that they are putting together to advance your asset management plan is used. To this event, there was the TAM competition where several students and young practitioners looked at a simple asset class, the culvert, and did a lot of modeling to show how one could phase and mediate culverts on either their home agency or some data that was presented from the state of Colorado. I can't say this enough, but if you're going to have an event somewhere, work with your host agency. Massachusetts Department of Transportation really knocked it out of the park as far as hosting this event. We had folks come in and talk about bridge asset management. We had folks come in and talk about challenges that they've had at the highway as well as the T. And we even had some maybe non-traditional presentations where we had their project management office come in and talk about how they incorporated some asset management principles into overhauling their overall capital delivery product. And that was another area where we had workshops and we had some Scrum Masters coming in to really talk about not only what challenges were identified at the agency, but how you could take about a way to workshop your way through those. And in the closing session, throughout the conference, we had invited folks to fill out a little survey that said, that identified something that they wanted to learn about or advance at home, and what the potential limitations to doing that would be. And a lot of this coalesced around the idea of resources and getting time with the right stakeholders. Our closing message to folks as they left the conference was to think about what the with them, the what is it for me, for the different accountable executives that would have to justify increasing staff, increasing software or consultant support, to show people what the value of asset management is so that we can continue to have those small wins. Like I alluded to in the beginning of my presentation, these things take time, but if you start to identify small gaps and really don't shoot for perfection, shoot for something before you advance, you can really start to make movement on moving your practice forward. So now I think we're going to turn it back over to Hayana, who's going to turn it over to Mike.
All right. Thanks, Laura, for a terrific overview of the entire conference. So our next presentation is from Mike Johnson, TAM lead for Caltrans, who was also the chair of the TAM Peer Exchange that occurred at the start of the conference. Mike.
Thanks, Yana, and welcome everybody. I have the pleasure of trying to quickly summarize 2 days of peer exchange that took place in advance of the actual conference itself. So this took place on Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning prior to the start of the conference. The peer exchange focused on a theme that we called the art of project selection, and I'll try to go through the discussions and conversations from that peer exchange. Before we get too far into that, I just want to acknowledge the Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO for sponsoring the peer exchange, and Laura and TRB organizing committee for really supporting us appending the peer exchange onto the national conference. This, doing a national conference is a big enough effort, and then you've got people that are kind of riding the coattails of the national conference, which was us. And then, Spy Pond Partners for supporting the development of the peer exchange, and also for documenting the findings from the peer exchange. And finally, a peer exchange is only good if you actually have peers there. And we had a great turnout. The conversation was really robust. We had some great presentations. So just want to thank all of those that put presentations together and those that participated to make the peer exchange a success. Okay, so having stated that, little bit about why we chose this topic, the art of project selection. It was really a recognition that agencies are faced with a lot of competing priorities. This has really been expanded, I think, with the IIJA legislation, because it established specific pockets of funding for specific objectives. And in the past, we have had less compartmentalizing of the funding as we do now. And so that's one dynamic that we were thinking about. The other dynamic is, looking broadly at transportation performance management. In this area, we're looking at safety and pavement and bridge condition, which is, kind of the traditional focus area for TAM. But then also, how does travel time reliability and air quality fit in? Then, within the IIJA legislation or act, there was specific funding for the first time for climate adaptation and resiliency. So we've been talking a lot about climate resiliency. Now there's money behind it. And so agencies were at a good time where they were, sort of right on the front lines of having to make decisions about where they're going to apply the Protect program funds that came from IIJA. And then, over the last several years, there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of research going on about equity and how do we incorporate equity into decision making and into the TAM framework. So we wanted to explore that a little bit in the peer exchange. So that, all of these things kind of together, got us to the conclusion that asset management is not just about pavement and bridge condition anymore. It's really about understanding all of the things that, that your agency may be trying to accomplish and trying to figure out what is an appropriate mix of work to get a whole bunch of different objectives accomplished. In terms of participants, we had state DOTs, cities, oversight agencies, academic entities. In total, we had about 65 attendees, and the number varied a little bit between Saturday and Sunday, but really a pretty full room and a good cross-section of people participating. So we had 4 different sessions within the 2 days. Our opening session featured presentations from 4 agencies, Michigan DOT, Minnesota DOT, Pennsylvania DOT, and Washington State DOT. Each of those agencies presented how their DOT in this case was selecting projects. What was the process? What were the challenges that they faced? And I think some of the takeaways, and again, I feel like I'm doing this a disservice, but to try to boil it down to a few big takeaways, coordination across a broad stakeholder group and gaining executive support was absolutely critical. And then developing a constrained investment plan to establish reasonable expectations. There is a limit to what we can do. It's oftentimes limited by funding or available funding, and so the ability to clearly communicate what can and can't be done with the funding you have. And this is particularly true when we start talking about climate adaptation. And then some of the agencies presented established formulas or scoring methodologies to help prioritize projects. And so there was a lot of questions that the participants were asking of those that were presenting. A much more robust discussion of each presentation is included in the summary report that I'll talk about at the very end. Okay, so that was session 1. We then moved on into our session 2. This was a group exercise. We had 8 table teams with approximately 8 people per team. And these tables teams were asked to put their heads together and prioritize 8 projects. So sounds simple, 8 projects. But they were given a set of goals for this fictitious agency that they were all working for. They were given performance information about current targets and current performance levels. They were given budget constraints and goals, and they were asked to pick projects. The one caveat was that this exercise was designed so that they didn't have enough money to do everything that was on the list. So only 8 projects, small microcosm of what many of us have to work with on a regular basis. But the exercise was specifically designed, I was looking to spur discussion about trade-offs between safety, condition, climate adaptation, equity, and usage. How are these decisions being made in the trenches at the project level? So some takeaways from this exercise. There was quite varied selection from the teams, and I'll show this in the next slide. One of the things that I really wanted to explore was there going to be a difference with projects that were selected that had quantifiable numeric performance targets versus those that didn't? And the takeaway was that projects without quantifiable performance targets fared pretty well. It was kind of surprising to me, frankly. And then, there was no consistent approach taken by these teams. So we had 8 teams, 8 projects. All the teams came up with different answers, and how they approached getting at those answers was quite varied as well. And so this led to some really, really great discussion. This is a summary table. So the groups represented the table teams, and the numbers that are going vertically down represent which of the 8 projects labeled project A through H was their priority, and they were asked to rank them in order. So for example, group 1 ranked project G as their #1 priority, whereas group 2 ranked project H as their #1 priority. So, we were, honestly, we were less concerned with who ranked what where, but more focused on looking at what were there consistencies. So if you look, if you look across the grid here, you can kind of see some things sort of jump out at you. One is that project A had the most #1 selections. So 5 of the 8 groups said this is our #1 priority. It happened to be a safety project, and there was a TPM safety goal that the teams were given, and they were given kind of a recent trend with respect to that agency's safety. In other areas like project B, selected by only 2 of the 8 teams. So, what happened? Why did 6 of the 8 teams not selected at all? In other words, they ran out of money, and project B was one of the ones that got cut. Moving down to something like project E, which was the only project that addressed climate adaptation, 5 of the 8 tables selected it, 3 did not, but generally it was prioritized around the middle of the pack in terms of those groups. So, we could get into a conversation, why did these 5 tables select this climate adaptation project when there was no specific TPM goal for climate adaptation, although the department had a general goal to make their system resilient. But this was kind of a surprising outcome to me, because I thought without a tangible target that the climate adaptation objective or need or goal as the agency would not get selected, but five of the 8 teams picked it. Project G on this list was a bicycle and pedestrian project. It had a safety aspect. It was in the vicinity of a school zone. It ranked pretty high by 5 of the districts, or 5 of the tables ranked it either priority 1 or priority 2. So, here's a multimodal aspect to the decision making and a safety aspect sort of wrapped into one. And then, put it in a school zone to kind of, get the emotion of we're talking about children here. And so five of the teams said, yeah, this is my #1 or #2 priority. And then finally, we had the 8th project, which was a congestion reduction project. Again, 3 of the tables ranked it very high. 3 of the tables said, we're not even going to fund this project. And so, this led to great internal conversations in the peer exchange about, well, how do we have these extremes where 3 tables say it's our #1 thing and 3 tables say we're not even going to fund it? And so while it's a small subset of projects, there was a lot of different different goals and objectives being reflected within these 8 projects. It led to the kind of conversation that we were hoping that we would have within the peer exchange. Okay, so then we moved on to our 3rd session. Our 3rd session was, we asked everybody to get up in front of the room in a fishbowl format and talk about one success. Just tell us one thing that you have had success with. Some of the things that we heard communication, both internal and external, is very important. The importance of having a champion and having an organizational that supports asset management. The importance of following data-driven objectives versus, maybe a political choice approach to project selection. Using desired performance outcomes to tailor projects instead of picking projects and then looking at what you get for performance. So kind of flipping the script with start with the end in mind, and then pick projects or tailor projects to get the outcomes you're looking for. There was a theme of the importance of asset preservation, because sometimes preservation gets lost in the asset management mix, but most agencies recognize the importance of this. And then, as a general theme, asset management was expanding beyond pavements and bridges in most agencies that I think spoke. And then our final session was looking at ways to improve the practice. We, had captured things throughout the 2 days. We gave everybody in the room an opportunity to vote. These were the top 5 items that were identified in terms of most votes. So the first item, and this was all geared towards what can we do as Federal Highway, as AASHTO, as TRB, through research avenues or other avenues to further the practice. The top vote getting thing was to look at work type tracking and forecasting. So this is, part of the TPM requirements, and to report expenditures by work type. Then we had, this idea of needing, kind of drawing on the peer exchange exercise. Asset management isn't just about pavement and bridge condition, and we're having to juggle a lot more objectives that are crossing different discipline areas. And, how do we expand our knowledge base to incorporate that into our decision making? And then, leverage AASHTO to develop more consistency. This was particularly true for the annual demonstrations of progress for the TAM and a couple other areas that were identified. There was some suggestions that maybe the Federal Highway Administration could look at potential changes in FEMAS to track these different colors of money to better understand, how the money's being spent for TAMs, because there was a, general recognition that the 5 work types and tracking the expenditures across the 5 work types was a challenge for most DOTs. And then lastly, with IIJA, there's a lot of discretionary grant funding, and it's very difficult to build the potential for funding into your longer term plans when you have no guarantee that you're going to get it. So how does the opportunity for grant funding fit into a 10-year plan, for example, or longer range plan? And so there's probably some work that needs to be done in that regard. How should we be planning for that? So that's kind of the quick summary. This is all documented in significantly greater detail in this report that I'm showing you that SpyPond put together. And this report's in its final review processes with Federal Highways and with the AASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. And once those reviews are complete and changes have been made in the final report, it will be sent to all the participants as well as posted on the TAM portal. And the report has a lot in terms of graphics from the various presentations, as well as significantly more detail than I was able to get into today. So with that, Hyana, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Mike. That was a very nice summary of the event. All right, we next have William Johnson, who's the TAM lead from Colorado DOT, and he's going to share noteworthy information from the conference regarding infrastructure risk and resilience innovations. William.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. This one was sort of hard to put down on one slide presentation, especially covering innovations in this sector. There's a lot of new things going on. I would say that probably half of the sessions that we had were very technical in nature. And so I encourage you, if you did have an opportunity to attend the conference, all those presentations are available on the conference website. Please make sure you go back into those and reference those. I am going to be flashing through a lot of materials, but just to give you an idea of what was covered, here's everything that was covered. We had workshops, we had sessions, we had interactive sessions / workshops. We even had an Oxford style debate throughout the conference, covering a myriad of topics, everything from visualization to deploying systems thinking within your resilience in risk process to sustainability is included in this, and also just general risk and getting comfortable with risk. I give a lot of credit to some of the session and workshop moderators. They do a lot of work, as Laura said, in preparing over a year and a half to get us to this. The workshop on risk and resilience visualization, as well as complementary session on visualization, was led by Emily Burns. I think the one thing that I want to highlight here is some information from Metro Analytics. They also had in the workshop a competition where the workshop participants were going through and really deploying sort of the best practices that came from NCHRP Synthesis 584 on visualization. They went through and developed some visualizations throughout the workshop. The next one was, and I think this was the one risk and resilience related session that I got the most feedback on, was getting comfortable with uncertainty. It's based off of some books, which I have in the bottom of the slide there, from Douglas Hubbard, in which throughout the workshop, people went through, and Todd Shepard gave an excellent moderation where he walked through people and really just establishing different risk profiles and tolerances for different situations. The whole activity, based on those 5 principles that you see there, was to give people an idea of just our inherent ability, as well as our professional ability, to do a lot with uncertainty. And coming into it with, we already have a large part of risk figured out, but it's really understanding that, we got to get comfortable using uncertainty within our decision making. Next one was led by Gerardo Flinch on sustainability and resilience. I included this in. Sustainability has become a larger part of the things that we're doing with resilience. A great key into that is, if you're currently struggling with getting the final touches to your protect discretionary grant projects in, you saw that there was a requirement to forecast out what your extreme weather events will be given climate change and increasing GHG. Within this, I highlight from 3 groups. One would be Broward MPO, just their resilience framework that they're using, a 9-step process within their decision making. Also from the United Kingdom, National Highways, and looking at their effort to get to net zero carbon emissions using a 2030, 2040, and 2050 year plan. And then the last is some new guidance from FHWA on addressing resilience to climate change and extreme weather in asset management. And I just put the framework there really quick for your reference. All great presentations. The next one was, this is the session that looked like a workshop. It was led by Prashant Ram with AppTech, Building Infrastructure Resilience. How do we adapt to the unknown unknowns? I highlight just a couple things here. One is Prashant gave a presentation on work that he's recently completed with US DOT Federal Highways, as well as Turner Fairbanks, on looking at wildfires. And you'll hear me more recently talking about wildfires, as well as you could just look on the news and see a lot about wildfires. I thought that this one would be an important one to bring up in this presentation, just given the circumstances, the unfortunate circumstances going on in Hawaii. So I think that was probably, prescient and timely information. The next one is from Maryland State Highway Administration and how they're using their asset management plan and the ancillary asset management plans to begin to address some of their unknowns and resilient challenges. Next one was led by this goofy dude here, William Johnson. And it was talking about the buck starts here, using risk to inform decisions. This is one where within the session, it was to understand how risk and the conversation about risk and resilience leads off investment decision making. We had three presenters that I just roughly encapsulated here. One from UDOT, where they have a bunch of cool tools within their presentation and a lot of data analysis and information within their dashboards that demonstrate how they're prioritizing their risk using that analysis and data, but also, putting it through their dashboards. They're getting it up front in their decision-making conversations. Next one is from Valley Metro. This is just a snapshot of the total presentation, but I think I want to capture here is when we're talking about baseline downpour, drizzle, partly cloudy, those are just rough descriptions of different types of risk and that they're thinking about, not event types. And this is particular to whether or not they're going to be getting a downpour. That is, they're severely constricted in how they can spend money. And then the graphs that you see are just rough tolerances that they have in terms of staffing. Next one is from Gannett Fleming. They provided some information. This is a snapshot I have here of their methodology for really introducing key stressors as well as root cause analysis to, an event occurred, we learned from it, now let's bring it forward in our investment process. Here is complementary to the workshop session, visualization and communication, telling the story of why it matters. Emily Burns, again, she was hard at work. A couple of the things here is that NCHRP synthesis 584. I have some information here from Metro Analytics. Really helped out here is make sure you're telling a great story, tying things back in through the information that you deliver through the web to your strategic goals, to your tactical approaches, to your nested or drill down dashboards, to even your further drill down dashboards. Basically line of sight and make sure that your story has a clear line of sight, as well as you see there the 5 state stories that were included within that synthesis. Just the rough good practices, keep it simple, tell a clear story, resonate with your audience, make your data transparent, and also that leadership matters. All key points within ensuring that your visualization is communicating the right things. Next is It's What's for Dinner, your one-stop shop for interdisciplinary risk management. This one had a great deal of technical information, a lot of information from institutions of higher ed, as well as one of our MPO partners. First focus on some presentation from CU Boulder, where they were looking at how flooding increases or reduces the amount of trips that you have. And I think that the consensus from that is, let me see here, I can't remember what the consensus is. Look at the presentation materials. The next one is from PIARC. This was given by Edgardo, PIARC in association with Vermont Trans Resilience Performance-Based Approaches. You could see here, they have some cool images here, but this is really a sort of process diagram of how they're including those resilience-based approaches within their asset management process. And then the last is from North Central Texas COG, and this was given by Jeff on integrating, it's called TSI, Transportation and Stormwater Infrastructure. I think that one of the pieces of information that they had there was Texas itself experiences more flooding events than any other state. And so they really have a big emphasis on managing water in their risk approaches. This is my next to last slide, Resilience Planning Framework in Transportation Systems, given by Victor Rivas. This is really looking at systems or different systems approaches and how they're deployed within agencies for resilience planning. The item there on the left, they introduce this concept of a resilience triangle and these various factors, how they influence that resilience triangle. The triangle being where you're maximizing your time and system functionality to achieve resilience against your resources, your responses, and the things that you're doing to achieve it. The next one was from AOC Systems Consortium. It's a systems approach to really looking at disparate systems and the complexity within those systems, bringing them all together in sort of a resilient ecosystem. That's the systems approach that they're talking about, to make sure that you're mapping the correct relationships and uncovering or identifying the key interaction points between those disparate systems within a total system for resilience. And then the last one was hosted by Matt Hardy. This was the Oxford style debate. It was included within the resilience session there, because I think we're really talking about risk and resilience of implementing new technology. And we had a team that included Matt Hardy as well as Scott Zainhofsky that were BIM skeptics against a team of Josh Johnson and Justin Bruner from Pennsylvania that were pro BIM. And you know, it was a very interesting Oxford style debate where they're discussing the pros and cons, the reality and the promise of implementing BIM. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to Hiana.
Sorry, my cursor misbehaved. All right, thank you, William. That was a very comprehensive summary that we all appreciate. All right, so our final presentation is from Matt Hardy of Spy Palm Partners, and he'll focus on the ideas that came from the organizations and people innovations. Matt.
Great, thank you, Hannah. All right. So thanks. So I'm going to talk about the session or sessions or the topic of organizations and people innovations that took place at the conference. Similar setup to what William did in terms of content and everything. Just kind of want to run through some of those sessions and sort of pick out some of those highlights from them that apply to this idea of sort of organizations and people. And I do have sort of 3 key takeaways that I'll talk about towards the end that I, sort of saw from this conference. So there were a number of sessions that kind of, well, I should say many of the sessions dealt with organizations and people in some way. There was one track on kind of organizations in general. But these are the sort of, I guess, 8 sort of different sessions that I thought, there was something in there, some sort of a little bit of a nugget that was interesting. So we had leveraging asset management to drive organizational change. TAM travel, a conversation with the past, present, and future of asset management, putting people at the center of your program implementation, achieving goals through effective performance management, the role of the asset management champion and their team. One presentation from one of the sessions that William talked about called the relational coordination factor, which was a very interesting presentation on better understanding how all different programs and people and parts of an organization relate to each other, and how sometimes that can sort of provide challenges or opportunities to implementing something, in this case, asset management. And then kind of talk about it again. I think Laura mentioned this at the very beginning. One of the closing session, turning your conference learning into organizational change. And then finally, hot tub TAM machine, which was the final closing session, and just give you sort of a flavor in terms of what happened there during that closing session. So the first one session, let me just move something out of the way here, was on leveraging asset management to drive organizational change. We had 2 good presentations there. One from New Mexico DOT. Unfortunately, Virginia couldn't make it due to travel circumstances. But that presentation, talked about New Mexico DOT's asset management experience from the within the executive steering committee, and how that had an influence on developing their 2022 asset management plan. The second one came from Chris Whipple of Utah DOT. And Chris talked about, along with Will Duke from Spy Pond, practical experiences using the AASHTO data guide to sustain and advance TAM programs. So Chris has been really sort of focused in on using many of the NCHRP products that have come out that have been sponsored by AASHTO and the AASHTO subcommittee on asset management, and kind of using them and applying them in their DOT. One of those being this one, the TAM data guide, and how he's using it to sustain their asset management program. Chris has also used the AASHTO asset management implementation guide and sort of other ones as well. So sort of great examples of using and applying and implementing some of that great research coming out of NCHRP to some extent. And then this session was moderated by Tamlin Kennedy from the Federal Transit Administration. So one of my key takeaways towards the end is this idea of relationships, and that this is not just about highways or anything, it's about the transportation system. So it was great seeing FTA along with some state DOTs sort of all in the mix, talking about leveraging TAM to drive organizational change. The second one was less about presentations, more about a conversation. This was a conversation with the past, present, and future of asset management. This one included our own William Johnson, John Kitchens from TriMet, Chi Chow from the Golden Gate Transit, and then Todd Lang from the Baltimore Metropolitan MPO. And as you can see in the description down there, when MAP 21 is the federal authorizing legislation that required both state DOTs and all transit agencies to develop and kind of implement a asset management program. So a number of these TRB TAM conferences had also taken place. So we thought it would be an interesting sort of conversation to have with people that had been involved since MAP 21 came out, and sort of talk to them about what happened in the past, what's happening now, and then how can we learn from that? How can we take that and then apply it to what the future of asset management may be moving forward, knowing that the future isn't written. There's a lot of uncertainty to it. There was in fact, a workshop or a session on being comfortable with uncertainty, but there is some certainty that asset management and managing the systems, the things that we have right now are going to continue to be important, probably more important maybe than sort of adding new capacity, whatever mode that might be, highways, transit, ports, etc. So that was a sort of an interesting conversation that took place. I'm not sure it was recorded. I'm not sure if there were notes taking, but sort of an interesting setup for a session at the TRB conference. The next one was talking about putting people at the center of your program implementation. It kind of gets to one of my again, that sort of, I mentioned earlier, one of those key takeaways about relationships. And a lot of this is about people and building those relationships with the people in your organization or outside of your organization. So we had a number of presentations from both the public sector and the private sector. So Louis Fegans from Indiana DOT, Hugh Quinn from MBTA, the Transit Authority in Boston, Cody Barrett, HNTB, and then Mark Ricketson with Massport based in Boston. But again, I think that sort of the importance of focusing in on people, and as you focus in on implementation, it's not just about having the technology correct or the data correct or the best process in place, but it's also about bringing those people with you. And some of those keys to success in terms of program implementation are the people, and bringing them on board, be them at the lower, junior staff level and getting them prepared and training them, or at the senior executive level and, getting them on board with what you are trying to do. The next session talked about achieving goals through effective program management. A number of good presentations, private side, public side. Justin Barclay, flip my page here. I got the old school agenda that I kind of like to flip through. Talking about pilot asset management systems within an agency, Jack Smith from North Dakota Department of Transportation, and then Max Brown from AMCL. Talking about, Max talked about a blueprint for change with King County Metro, using the Metro capability model to support asset management business transformation. I thought Jack's presentation and kind of what he talked about specifically, all the states, many agencies develop plans. Lots of agencies talk about their family of plans, and then Jack kind of narrowed in on integrating the long-range transportation plan and the idea of scenario planning, scenario analysis into the TAM gap analysis. Over on the right-hand side, sort of a little preview of some of the 4 different scenarios that they came up with and applied to their sort of long-range transportation planning and TAM gap analysis, a rural renaissance, cities and centers, smart and connected, and then ghost towns, and trying to apply that sort of scenario planning mindset aspect technique to asset management. So again, 3 great presentations. The other nice thing about this gets at one of my key takeaways in terms of how people learn, is that much of this information is available on the web. So if you download this presentation, I think the link will be posted. Everything is hyperlinked. So if you're interested in these sessions, just click on the title here and it'll take you to the program, which is online. And working our way towards the end, this one, the role of asset management champions and their team. And again, that people, right, which is a theme here. And then the organization, the team that champion is on. So Justin Barclay, who was provided a presentation from his support of the Maryland DOT, Maryland Transit Administration, the MTA, and talking about the TAM Ambassador program that was developed there to really get sort of asset management ingrained and sort of bought in with all the people within MTA first, and then MDOT sort of, I guess, second, or in addition to just not just the modal administration, but the Department of Transportation as well. Our very own Laura Zale talked about a perspective from SEPTA, and there's a sort of a screenshot from one of her slides about improving alignment with agency goals and plans. You know, again, we talked about those family of plans. And then Lou Cripps from RTD in Denver talked about implementation within RTD. I thought he had a number of good sort of takeaway slides. One example there, takeaway 2, talking about stay focused on the script and kind of laying out why that's important. And then some of his sort of 5 key takeaways from implementing asset management within his agency. Commitment is earned, not given. Stay focused and sort of run that script. That's what that key takeaway number 2, sort of more detail about that. Number 3, label and manage our inputs, do the next right thing. And then 5, have a call to action. So again, lots of good information. All these presentations, if you want the details, are available up on the website. This is the one I have, I think, 2 more after this. This is from a session on planning for resilience. They brought into the conversation this idea of the relational coordination factor. I had never heard about this before, but Jody Hoffer-Gattel from the Heller School of Social Policy and Management talked about the relational coordination collaborative, and just this idea of the importance of understanding the relationships within an agency, within an organization, and how that has an impact or can affect the overall outcomes or performance, of that agency, and implementing, a system or implementing a new way of doing something or a practice or something like that. But she talked about it. There was a sort of a tabletop exercise of trying to quickly go through and apply some of the aspects of this relational coordination factor. I don't think the time did her justice in terms of the amount of information she was trying to convey. There's a website down there. I would encourage everybody to kind of go to that website and learn more about this idea of the relational coordination factor. They have some good, I think a lot more good information there that you can kind of use and apply within your agency, and just understand that idea of the relationships and how everything kind of relates to each other, and just visualizing that and understanding it, and how that can kind of present barriers or opportunities. Laura mentioned this, but Art Markman was there talking about how do you take what you learned from this conference and actually apply it within your organization, right? Going back to that theme of organizational innovations. I think one of the innovations from this conference, as Laura mentioned, is that, having a focus on this. So all throughout the conference, you were encouraged to kind of, submit your ideas and such to a Google form. And then he kind of went through that. But he has a lot more information on his website. So if you're looking into, if you're interested in how do you do sort of, implement some of these changes and everything, a lot of good information. The idea that podcast and just kind of listening to how others do this, I thought it was interesting. A good way to sort of wrap up the conference, because oftentimes we go to a conference and then we just leave, but he kind of left us with a call to action. Don't just go back. Think of something that you can do, take back to your organization and hopefully make a change, implement something, take something back that you learned from the conference to it. And then finally, we have our closing session, the hot tub TAM machine. This was done by the track leads. A good conversation. We try to encourage and kind of bring in all of the participants in this closing session. So in our hot tub, TAM machine. We have Emily Burns. These are some of the track leads: Laura Zale, Jack Moran, William Johnson, Victor Rivas, and then Matt Haubrich. You can see that we had a play off of lots of movies out there, sort of movie ideas and movie titles. So we try to have fun, I think, with the conference and not get too dry. I think that's another sort of lesson learned when it comes to conference planning. Have catchy titles. But we asked a number of questions. I don't have time to go through all of these right now. But one, is this your first national TAM conference? So we had 58 responses, and we had about 2/3 of the people saying, yes, this is my first time attending a TAM conference, and about 1/3 saying no. So what this sort of says to me is that, when I first started going to these TAM conferences 13 years ago, it's a very different audience, today. And we need to understand that kind of moving forward, that we are going to have this turnover. And that's one of my key takeaways also, is that, people are going to be moving about and everything. And that's okay. We just got to sort of understand that. And how can we design perhaps a conference or sessions or resources or everything, knowing that people are going to be moving about. We asked questions about what other tool, again, getting into some of the specifics about TAM implementation within your agency. What other tools do you think are needed to be developed to support TAM implementation? This gets at some of the research and everything that we think needs to get done through the various TRB committees. Specifically, what other research do we need to start now to support asset management implementation? And this isn't something, when we talk about research that we want tomorrow, this is something where, okay, we got to come up with the idea now, because it's going to take a few years to kind of get things going and get those results. So we got to be thinking not, tomorrow, but we need to be thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead, so that we can kind of, play to where the ball's going to be, hit the ball where it's going to be, as opposed to where it is right now. What do you see the TAM industry addressing 5 years from now? Just trying to sort of look out to see what that future is. You can kind of see some of those. This is just a smattering of what was talked about. And then finally, what did you hear at this conference that you wish the TAM community at large could have heard? So we're going to try to summarize these as well, because perhaps a lot of you weren't able to attend the conference. So we're trying to figure out what are some of those key messages that we can kind of take back and kind of provide to the rest of the industry in some way. So that's on our to-do list, which is to summarize that as well. Key things is that these resources and everything are going to be available. So at the TAM portal, tam-portal.com, at the TRB website, where you can get access to the program and everything. And what I'm going to leave you with are some of my key takeaways. So the first one, and it kind of has to do with an opening session that William Johnson, Matt Haubrich, and I did, but this idea of technology, and specifically the generative AI, the chat GPTs, the bards, those types of things, I think that's going to have a huge impact on the industry. I have no idea how. Is it about writing the asset management plan? Is it about doing different ways of doing data analytics or visualizations? I don't know. But when Matt, William, and I were putting together that session, we used Chat GPT very quickly. And I think all three of us were very surprised, with our jaws dropped, going like, wow, it can do that, and it can do it very, very quickly. And I think of this, kind of going back to 1993, when I was at George Mason University, and I first saw Mosaic, the Mosaic web application, pop up on a computer lab that I was in at Science and Tech 2 at George Mason University in 1993. I was like, wow, what's this web thing? And I remember, first playing around with it. And at that point had that aha moment, like, oh my gosh, this could change the world. I wasn't smart enough at the time to do anything with it, but I was just like, thinking, brainstorming. I was like, how could we be using this in the future? And then in the 2007, 8, 9, 10 sort of time frame, as the iPhone and Android phones and everything came to be, and I got my first Android one, I was just sort of amazed, again, of the technology about 15 years later. And then it's about 15 years later again, right? And this new thing, this generative AI, and how that's going to change the way we live, work, and have fun and stuff like that. So that's the first thing, is just
Hey, Matt, you're frozen.
Yes.
Okay.
The idea of learning, with this conference, we try to do things very differently, as interactive as possible. The Oxford style debate, the workshops, mini workshops, and everything. So we just got to rethink how we run these conferences and just think through, how do people learn? How do they want to learn? And how do they want to sort of consume and get information? And then finally, the third key takeaway, it's all about relationships. And I think having these types of conferences is great because you have that in person you just can't get from web-based, that sort of thing, but also relationships within an agency, right? Executive versus, career staff, people that are going to be there for 4 or 5 years versus people that have been there for 10, 15 years. How do you create those relationships and just keep things moving, internal, external, breaking down silos, that sort of thing. So with that, I'll stop there and turn it back over to Hyana.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Good provocative thoughts for the discussion we'll be having. So thank you to all of our presenters. And if you have any questions for the presenters, please put them into the chat feature and we can, or raise your hand and we can ask to call on you. But we're just gonna go into a discussion part where you can just unmute yourself, put on your camera and speak. That works just as well. And Matt Haubrich and I are gonna kind of co-moderate this. So I'm just gonna start by saying, for me, I really enjoyed being back together with the community in person. That was like, first and foremost, it's like, here are my peeps, it's good to be together. But also I noticed, and I felt this at the virtual session, the meeting we had 2 years ago as well, which was just that, when you're all together seeing this kind of plethora of presentations, you do get this this sense of the maturity of agencies and the progress they're making. And that was noticeable as well. So Matt, what about you?
Well, I definitely have to agree with that second point. I mean, it's amazing how far we've come. Thinking back on my first asset management conference was the San Diego 2012 conference. We were in San Diego again in 2018, but in 2012, we had, that was prior to MAP 21 and the requirement for all agencies to have asset management plans. And there were a lot of things that were still very much kind of in their infancy. We're talking a lot about kind of agency assessment and so forth. And although that's still an important thing for us to kind of keep looking at how we assess ourselves in terms of maturity and so forth, I think that the maturity has definitely grown dramatically. And we see that reflected in the presentations and the information that's being shared at conferences like this. I still think that there's a need for this kind of ongoing information sharing, even though many agencies have matured. I think that we're seeing the chart that Matt showed earlier with the Mentimeter showing the number of people for whom this was their first conference really, speaks to the tremendous amount of turnover that we've had in the industry. How many people are coming into this new and are needing information to help them be successful in their roles as asset managers. And so I think there was a lot of fantastic content that was delivered here. And I'm just hoping that it's reaching all the folks who need that information to be able to help them be successful ultimately. The other thing that's always strikes me about a conference like this, it's fantastic to have a recap like this because, even for those of us that were able to be involved in the planning committee process, we couldn't go to all the sessions. You can't be in 5 places at once. And so there were a lot of these sessions that, I thought sounded fascinating, but had other commitments and wasn't able to be in everywhere at once. So I love the idea of having a recap like this where kind of rekindle some of those things that, as I was at the conference able to think about at the time, but maybe hadn't had the opportunity to go back and reflect on since then, and definitely looking forward to going back in and pulling in some of those presentations and hopefully learning from those authors and those presenters about their perspectives and what they were sharing at the conference, and how we might be able to take advantage of some of their knowledge in my own agency.
Thanks, Matt. Emily, I see that you're with us. Do you want to share any of your takeaways, since you were also on the planning committee?
Diana, I apologize. I am driving.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'm going to come through very well, but I want to reiterate some of the comments I heard earlier. There were so many new people there. So it was great to make new connections, and they weren't just people who are working in asset management. They're people who are working around asset management. They're maintenance managers and, these asset owners. And it was a very engaging opportunity to talk with them and get different perspectives. I think the other sort of takeaway I'd come with is how much I learned from other people about what they're doing, what they're excited about, what challenges they're having, and what tools are out there. And then there's a lot of need, I think, for data and understanding data and how to work with it on a national basis. Just a couple of thoughts. I'm sure I could come up with more, but I want to thank everybody who came, who was involved. It was an incredible experience and such a nice way for us all to get back together.
Thanks, Emily. Any others who want to share their takeaways from the conference? You can just unmute and chime in. How about the question of, what are some of the things when you finish the conference that you felt like you're going to do with what you learned or saw at the conference? Like what were those action takeaways, meaning now I'm going to do what this agency is doing and bring it to my agencies, or seeing all of the different presentations really made me think about some of the integration needs. What are some people's thoughts on that? Oh, Mike, you're going to have to talk because you just turned on your camera.
Well, I was going to talk because there was an awkward silence there for a minute. So I thought I'd fill the space a bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we have these conferences, it's not something that, I directly see and take away. Sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's a combination of 2 or 3 different things that kind of get mashed together, right? And I would say one of the things that my team and I have had follow-up work since the conference started with one of the peer exchange presentations from PennDOT, and they had presented some short animated videos that they did. And it fills this gap of communicating concepts generally to the public or to, legislative type external officials. And then following that up with, some of the innovation and other things. And so we've actually found that we can take our existing content from various written sources, go into like a chat GTP engine, and produce a video script in about 5 minutes. And we can paste, what could be voluminous text in there and say, summarize this for me in 2 pages. And then once you get that, take that and say, okay, now create a video script from it. And then you can take that video script, you can edit it if you want. But in most cases, we found it's pretty good, like right out of the gate. And then take that information and plug it into some of these other products that actually make these videos for you. And so we've been looking at 2 products. One is called Deep Brain and the other one's called Design AI. And these products will take that video script and give you a professionally announced video on a topic. So you can go from, I've got an existing document to I've got a short video on something in probably less than 15 minutes. And to me, I think there's tremendous potential application in this to convey more TikTok style, short video descriptions of certain things for educational purposes, both internal with staff turnover as well as external, in addition to training and in other areas. So, it wasn't like, oh, we just saw it and we grabbed it. It was sort of a collection of different thoughts that all came together, but was really, I would say, the idea was spurred by something that PennDOT was doing, coupled with, a lot of the AI discussion that's sort of emerging. So that's a tangible takeaway that we're exploring in Caltrans.
Well, I love that, how one thing triggered another, right? And actually I just wrote down, and we may follow up with you, but I think this may be a process we can really use also for the update to the AASHTO TAM guide as well. Simon.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Good. My comment was congratulations to all the conference organizers. I was really pleased to be at the event, and I found it very, very worthwhile. Someone's always got a but, and I don't know if this is a but. It's not a but, it's really an and, which is some of us who are working in the area of sort of asset data lifecycle management find that there are a number of conferences in this domain. The TAM conference being certainly the premier one for TAM explicitly, but also IHEAP has sessions covering some of these areas. The AASHTO GIST symposium, which I think I first went to 35 years ago when we set it up, covers some of this. So I just wondered in future whether it would be good to have a correspondence with some of these other activities, because some of us do have limited conference dollars. I hope this conference proceeds ahead, but sort of maybe a little bit of correspondence between these different events, so they're not so duplicative, or any duplicative sessions are cut out, or maybe it is good that they're common sessions. There are a couple of workshops I know common between these conferences because I've been doing them, but maybe just something to think about for the future.
Thanks, Simon. Actually, that's a good lead into the next question, which is, what are people's suggestions for improvements for the next conference, for a future gathering? So I think, Simon, your comment really fell under that bucket. Do people have thinking about that? What would you do?
This is Matt Hardy. I think the interactive, engaging type sessions, I think, is critical. So the peer exchange, the workshops that we had, the design of the session, so it's not just 3 or 4 presenters where you're sitting. The rapid fire sessions for the posters and everything. I think that type of creativity, I think, is critical to making these conferences a success. I realize that those are more challenging to do. It takes more time and effort and everything, but I think it's an important balance that anybody can just put together 3 or 4 presentations, have the moderator, boom, go. But I think the other ones are probably a little more engaging for people and more, attuned to their sort of learning styles and everything. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really thought that, we heard Mike Johnson's presentation of the exercise, but that took some effort to set up. Like, it's not, you can't quickly just wham, get it done. But but it was fascinating then to see that you have the same scenario with the same information and how differently the results were, right? And that's, I thought, the key takeaway on that one was just that it depends, it's not formulaic, right? But that having you can see it because it was set up that way. So it's partly like designing the interactive, doing the pre-work better to get the results you want. Yeah.
I think Laura turned her camera. Oh, there you go, Laura.
Yeah, I want to follow on to the theme that Matt just brought up and say one of the things that we did this conference that I thought worked pretty well was that in addition to allowing people to submit abstracts for posters or for traditional sessions, we let people suggest entire panels. I think that's a really good takeaway for anybody in a planning committee, because as much as you try to find people and try to network to people within your within your networks, there's always an opportunity to reach out to other people that have also thought really hard about this thing. And they can't all be on the planning committee, but they can certainly help you find that content that's been worthwhile for you. There were at least 3 of these that originated in that way. I think they were really fantastic additions. So I would suggest to anybody who's putting an event like this to maybe open yourself to that possibility of working with somebody like that to partner with you to put on content that relates to the people that you're trying to present to.
Thanks, Laura. Jocelyn, do you want to just share your comment with the group?
Sure. I was just taking maybe a tangential approach to what Simon was saying, because what he said makes, a lot of sense. But what that sparked in my mind was that there are, a million other conferences that take place. And if there is an opportunity to have an asset management session there to help infuse and make the connections to those other programs or discipline areas, that could be a future opportunity. Not to reinvent the wheel of what this conference does, but to help others, we just talked about organizations and everything, help others see their potential role or connection to the topic. Thanks.
Thanks, Jocelyn. All right, so with that, let's just go to the next slide. Our next webinar is going to be on October 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic is going to be on communicating transportation asset management. That's going to be webinar 65. You'll hear more from us on this webinar and future webinars, and you'll be able to join us. If you have any suggestions for great presentations for this webinar or an interactive session, please let us know, and please go to tam-portal.com to events, to webinars, and you'll be able to see the recording and slides from today's webinar. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters. Bye-bye.